To the eNCA money desk now. Melissa Tuchy is standing by. Melissa, of course, we know it's not just power cuts affecting the state of our economy. We saw the reaction of the rand to claims from America that South Africa had supplied weapons to Russia. What's the bigger picture?
Well, Anli, South Africa's current foreign policy positioning could worsen the state of the economy. Speaking at Africa Day celebrations, President Cyril Ramaphosa says some international countries could take action against South Africa for its non-aligned foreign policy stance. But despite the risks, Ramaphosa says government stands by its decision and called on other African countries to avoid being dragged into global conflicts. So what does this mean for agreements like the African Growth and Opportunity Act trade deal? Donald Mackay, director at eNCA International Trade Advisors, joins me now to answer this question and more. Donald, thank you for joining us. It's been a few weeks now since the Russian arms saga reached boiling point. South Africa is still trying to save its position in the US AGOA duty-free pact. Is this risk of us falling out of this pact still high?
Yeah, I think it is. We'll have to see what happens over the next few weeks. I guess the most important event will be if Putin arrives in person in South Africa or not. But absolutely, I do think there is risk, and there's no reason to think it's disappeared.
Yesterday, we saw a plunge in the rand. Today, we saw a little bit of a recovery. As the Reserve Bank governor spoke of currency weakness, our geopolitical position undoubtedly plays a role in the currency's value. So these are connected more than we would want it to be.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the currency is generally a crude measure of how people view South Africa, and I think the currency reflects that there's some alarm and certainly some nervousness. I think if there is any kind of action taken by the US, which could happen fairly quickly, they could put South Africa, for example, into an out-of-cycle review. And if that were to happen, benefits could be selectively suspended, which would be kind of, I think, the clever way for the US to play this if they do anything at all. And that could result particularly in sectors like agriculture being on the sharp end of this.
Why do you think trade leaders in the US and indeed other government leaders find it so difficult to buy the so-called non-aligned position that South Africa says it has with regards to Russia?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone really thinks we're non-aligned because we're not behaving in a way that appears to be non-aligned. So it doesn't help to simply say that we're non-aligned. I think if we were genuinely neutral in all of this, I don't think we'd see terribly much of the fallout we are. But the military maneuvers that happened a little while ago, the allegations, of course, on the Lady R, we don't know if that's true, but we do know it was an embargoed vessel. The recent Russian military aircraft landing at Waterkloof, all of these are not helping, nor is all of the time that our senior military leaders are spending in Moscow. So I think we're not behaving like a neutral country. And I think that is quite alarming for people that are a lot closer to this war.
So the BRICS summit is coming in a few months' time. What effect do you see it having on our trade relations with the West and with Putin maybe being here?
Yeah, so I think it'd be really bad if Putin arrived. And I think we probably see the US most likely to take an action. AGOA is very much a political tool, and it's quite openly such. So it'd be very easy for the US to say to South Africa, you have no entitlement to these benefits. We're going to withdraw them. And I certainly think that's a risk. But I think even if that doesn't happen, we've seen a slow deterioration of our relationship with lots of our Western trading partners, including Europe, as well as the US. And I think that will simply continue, which means all of the beneficial access we have could be interrupted with interesting non-tariff barriers and just finding it harder to get things like citrus into those countries as they just choose to not actively deal with the complaints that we have.
You just spoke about it for a bit, but if we were to be left out of the AGOA agreement, where do we fall exactly? The trade deal accounted for 400 billion rand of trade between South Africa and the US last year, and that included citrus, like you mentioned, also poultry, a lot of mining products. Where does it leave the producers back home?
Yeah, so to be clear, the AGOA part of our US trade is about 60 billion. Our total trade with the US is close to 400. But 60 billion is still a huge amount. The most impacted sector would be automotive, which is about 15 billion, and then rapidly followed by agriculture. It would be very bad. We would, for products like citrus, for example, where we send the bulk of our citrus either to the US or the EU, with the EU closed, if the US were to close too, I think we'd rapidly see job losses. The citrus that we can't sell into the US, which is huge volumes, would have to find another home, or we would simply not be able to export it, and it would end up in the local market at very low prices. So it would be very bad on our citrus producers, but the effect on the US would be minimal. The US accounts for about 9% of our exports, and those exports account for less than 0.5% of the US's imports. So taking an action against South Africa would have very little economic consequence for the US, but could be quite devastating for South Africa.
Thank you for your time, Donald. That was Donald Mackay, Director at eNCA International Trade Advisors.